Koenig.
We have no questions for the witness.
Good evening, Mr. Pierce.
Good evening.
Are you familiar with the company's September 2023 RFPs?
Yes, sir.
I've asked earlier, there's a statement in those that says, all three of them, I believe. And I'm just reading off the Think of Power website. So if you've got a better version of them than I do, I'd be happy to see it. But it says, project must be interconnected to PJM. And I'm reading that from the thermal RFP. Wind and solar says projects must be interconnected to PJM. Storage one says projects must be interconnected to PJM. Although the storage and the wind and solar indicate they can be connected to the distribution system as well. But then they all three go on to say that they all have to have at least a system impact study that remains active in the PJM queue. Is this, do you read this portion of the RFP based on your familiarity with it to mean that they already have to be interconnected in the sense that they need an executed ISA, or that's their intention to be interconnected to PJM?
I read that the part about they must be interconnected to PJM, I think is in reference to they must be interconnected to PJM as opposed to interconnected to MISO or something like that.
Okay.
So, but they must have a system impact study, as you heard a couple of witnesses Ali describe.
I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Okay.
Do you believe that should be, or do you read that to be a requirement that a project responding to the RFPs must have an ISA? At the time when they respond?
I don't recall those specific words in there. They have to have a completed system impact study. And there's some other provisions. They have to have site control. There's some other things that are required in there.
Yeah, and I even looked up the, you all provide some helpful recurring Q&As based off of what people saw it. Okay, I'm going to ask it a different way just so I'm, regardless of whether they have an SIS, which I guess is withdraw that. Is the RFP, do you all indicate that the RFP is for resources that are already interconnected to PJM at the time they apply?
Okay. Your Honor, you're going to tell me a little bit. When you say already interconnected, do you mean like already achieved their commercial operation date? Because I believe the answer is no.
Yeah, so, okay, that's what, so it says it as if must be planning to interconnect to PJM, not, but I want to make it very clear, this is not for already connected generators with a signed interconnection agreement that already have already way past the SIS point are connected to PJM, or is it just supposed to be they're supposed to be connected to PJM as opposed to eventually as opposed to a different transmission operator?
Yes, Your Honor. The regulated infrastructure development team actually develops the RFPs.
Okay.
We review those. But as I said a minute ago, I read that language to mean that it could have been perhaps a little bit better worded, but that they're referencing there that meaning, you know, which RTO we're talking about, and in this case PJM.
And so it's
But I don't believe it has to be a project that has actually already signed the services agreement and certainly not reached its commercial operation date. And I think some of the other words in there, just again, like, you know, you must have site control. I mean, you know, clearly it would be you're already in service. You've achieved COD, commercial operation date, if it was expected to already be in service. So it is just you have to have been through at least the system impact study on your project. But we put that level of detail, you know, discussing with the group that actually runs the RFPs. Again, we help the evaluation. I think it's a pretty good metric. You know, we want to be careful that we allow projects that are under development. On the other hand, we can't, you know, it's not good for customers for us to rely on projects that are just kind of an idea in somebody's mind yet as well.
And that's the idea behind the site control and the SIS. Is that right? Far enough along in the queue that they're not going to take forever. Financing, I think one of the requirements was a financing plan. Do you remember that?
It's been a while since I reviewed it, but I wouldn't disagree that's in there.
All right. Mid-year capacity, Mitchell situation. Do you agree it would be unreasonable for no one to get the benefit of capacity? Oh, never mind. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to ask Mr. Vaughn that question. Scoring rubrics. As a general matter, are a AEP operating company the final call on what a scoring rubric will be for an RFP, or is there a general one that's used by operating companies within the system?
The scoring rubric is really defined by Kentucky Power. I mean, we can advise, but they make the decision on that.
Okay, so I'd like to ask as a post-hearing data request for the most recently used scoring rubric without any, just literally the rubric. Does that make sense? Not like,
Generic rubric not populated with any specific information to this
not
RFP.
with, not scoring projects, just the rubric itself.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So we'll ask that in a post-hearing data request, the most recently used rubric. Or scoring, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get pedantic on it. But it's just, if you call it something different, we'll take it. So,
I think they do. But
okay. Other than the thermal resources, are all of the RFP responses, other than people who may have withdrawn, are all the RFP responses the same as the ones that were provided in case number 2021-370? Did you provide those by any chance in that case? Well, let me ask. RFP responses, okay? To the September ones. Were they all due on the same day, do you know? To the three different?
I think they were all due around the same time frame, if not the same day.
And are they all being looked at separately, or as they all come in three different ways, because you wrote three different RFPs. Are they all in the same bucket, or is there a thermal bucket, a wind and solar bucket, and a battery bucket?
Yes, Chairman, that's a great question. The way that we usually do the evaluation is we will, if you will, look at each type of resource in its own bucket. It's kind of what we sometimes call best in breed, right? We'll analyze the solars, the wind, the thermals, but then to evaluate the best portfolio overall for Kentucky Power, then in the final step, we'll bring all of them together and basically sort them based on the total ranking of all the projects.
Yeah, and so for instance, if conceptually the IRA passes, right? You're in the middle of a process in the past, right? But it's a good example. The IRA passes, the Inflation Reduction Act comes out, and you go, look, we got these three buckets. We think battery's going to have been materially affected by that change. The wind and solar would. We don't think the thermal would. You all would necessarily hold up the final evaluation of thermal, maybe go out and ask respondents to the wind, the solar, and the battery, hey, is your pricing different now with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act? And then you would just be holding up the third bucket of thermal, waiting for your other two, figure out your best in breed for all three, and then you would move on to your portfolio analysis. Is that a reasonable explanation of the kind of distinction that's made between those best in breeds in different buckets?
Yes, Your Honor. And I think now this time around, fortunately, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed long enough ago that it really wasn't one. This time, what we're seeing is, as I had mentioned, is with the new EPA rules. So while we do have some baskets of projects that aren't affected by it, we do have some. And yes, we have to understand, how is that going to affect their relative ranking when we bring them all together. So we have to kind of put the others on hold for somewhat. But with that said, we're certainly not expecting the impacts of the EPA to result in a thermal bid being more favorable, for example. So we can't say with confidence if we had, for example, a project not affected in such a way that it was pretty much at the top of the scoring, and we're holding off the thermal, but we understand time is of the essence. So we may not have to hold
Look, when
that type of project.
when you say, I was making sure I understand, your response there is relative to the other two buckets.
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
So,
Yeah, I'd just like to
That's-
remind
oh,
the
that's
witness
all.
that we're not in confidential session.
That's
Okay,
all.
we were getting
Do you have
close,
any,
okay.
do you have
Oh,
any
yeah.
redirected this witness, Mr. Gish?
I do not.
Anything else for this witness?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pierce.
Dr. Pierce, excused.
Do you have to call your last witness?
I am.
Yes, Kentucky Power calls Alex Vaughn. He'll be presented by Mr. Gish.
Mr. Vaughn, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right, please have a seat. State your name and business address for the record.
My name is Alex Vaughn. My business address is 1 Riverside Plaza in Columbus, Ohio.
Mr. Gish?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vaughn, can you please state your job title?
I am the Managing Director of Regulated Generation and Fuel Strategy for AEP Service Corporation.
And did you provide responses to data requests in this case?
I did.
And based on what you knew then, if I asked you those same questions now, would you give the same responses?
Yes, I would.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vaughn is available for cross-examination.
Mr. West?
No questions.
Mr. Kurtz?
No questions.
No questions.
Oh, we have no questions.
Good evening, Mr. Vaughn.
Oh, good evening.
Yeah, almost. Like the troll under the bridge. I'm here to keep you crossing without doing a little bit of work. You've heard the conversation about the Mitchell capacity mid-year situation with the 28-29 delivery year.
Yes.
Do you believe it would be unreasonable for no one so if, just, again, taking a lot of things at face value, but if Mitchell is not at all retired, let's just say it plans on operating into infinity for the purpose of this question, right?
Sure.
But that it is going to be owned at a minimum by operating companies in the AEP system. Okay. It is going to be available for the entirety of the 28 to 29 delivery year for the purposes of AEP East FRR plan. Okay, for all those. Regardless of this whole who should we account for who gets the benefit of it, it would in that scenario count towards 700 plus megawatts as derated, for lack of a better term, by some future capacity accreditation. But it's going to have a megawatt value in the AEP East FRR plan, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I imagine it would function just like it did when Kentucky Power's Rockport UPA ended mid-delivery year, right? They received, while you can't have a partial year capacity resource in the market. This is kind of one of the other benefits of FRR in that control of that unit from a capacity standpoint was still within the FRR plan, still within those companies, and Kentucky Power received financial credit for the UPA for part of the delivery year, and then purchased for the rest of it. And I imagine something very similar would happen in the circumstance that you've articulated.
Like a prorated
Yeah.
from June 1st to December 5th or whatever, December 6th.
If you
whatever
needed
it
to
was.
buy capacity, you're buying 5 months rather than 12. The back half, not the whole thing. Because in your hypothetical, it's still in the family. It's just accounting.
Yeah, and so insofar as the modeling here assumed a full capacity purchase at, let's call it in excess of $15 million for the entirety of that loss, that is all else equal, an outer bound of that cost because, well, you're not gonna have to buy the entirety of 700. You're probably gonna buy 5/12 of that amount.
Yeah, right. This is there's a difference in the planning the planning analysis and what would practically happen. I think I heard it described earlier as a worst case assumption. I think that's fair.
There's the power coordination agreement, and then these bilateral contracts that Mr. West referred to. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. The bilateral contracts are exclusively for capacity.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Has Kentucky Power entered into any firm energy contracts over the past couple years, or do you know whether the company intends on entering into any firm energy contracts?
So we're in that process right now. So nothing has changed from the plan we put out in the last IRP and what we've been working on here with the bilaterals of capacity to replace the UPA, the market energy purchases, and then that was meant to be a bridge to a long-term asset, which is the RFP process we're currently conducting now. So we are currently going through that process.
Okay. Well, and the PCA was actually called, or at least referred to in previous instances as the Bridge Power Coordination Agreement. Do you remember that?
That was a different
I'm saying, but the idea was a bridge, right? A short term
to a different
to where
thing
you're
that
going.
didn't
Yeah,
happen.
I get it was a
Yes.
different transaction.
Yeah.
The idea is to get you from one place to the other. So this is capacity, the power coordination agreement, and the bilaterals are capacity.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I know what I was asking. So two questions. What were you doing? I think you answered that one. But you all have not purchased any bilateral transactions that included energy since, well, other than the Rockport UPA.
No, to fill as we've indicated, since the Rockport UPA ended, we've purchased the bilaterals of UCAP, so that Kentucky Power would meet its obligations, and we've purchased low cost market energy, and that's customers have benefited from that. You know, that was part of the plan. That's what we're implementing, and now that's coming to an end as we plan for the next long-term resource that we're working towards right now.
Or portfolio of resources.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
One or more.
Okay. So I'm not made fun of. If you don't call it a rubric, what do the AEP companies call the scoring guide for responses to score responses to RFPs?
Yeah, when you said that earlier, I couldn't think of what we actually did. I don't know, it's like a matrix, a rubric, whatever word you're into. But yeah, it produces the price and non-price scoring that ultimately goes into the ranking of assets that Kentucky Power would use to inform its decision on what it would choose.
Based on your time with the companies and particularly involved in, I think at one point, I don't know if you are anymore, at one point you were heavily involved in these sort of issuance, or at least what's your experience with RFPs while at AEP?
Yeah, so, oh gosh, I'm trying to think here. So for the last 3+ years, my team's been directly responsible for the regulatory approvals of the new assets that come out of all of the RFPs in our vertically integrated companies. So I've been involved in all of them.
Have you been involved in the creation of these matrices or rubrics before?
Yes, myself and many other groups all have input, right? You want to have your subject matter experts in the various areas, like Mr. Ali was discussing earlier, have inputs into what criteria, you know, the operating company should be considering. But again, at the end of the day, one portion of the scoring may be more important to a certain operating company in a certain state versus another one, and so that's really what makes it through, right? We make recommendations, they make choices.
Yeah, and what I wanted to ask you about is your time at AEP and your involvement in those matrices or scoring guides. Are you aware of any experience in which the inclusion of well, did you hear my questions earlier about the fact that did you hear my questions earlier about the degree by which executive compensation is based off of an increase in the megawatts of carbon-free emitting generation?
Yeah, I did hear that.
Okay. Assuming that that is a 10% weight of executive compensation AEP, let's just assume that. Have you had firsthand experience where that is taken into account in determining how to score, how to rate, or what to apply for in terms of generating capacity?
I have never been in a discussion where anyone's compensation has been discussed as a driving factor for how a resource would be chosen. And I can also add that goal has been changed and or no longer exists. So the new goal is related to ensuring reliability through the energy transition, to the fleet transition. And so it's in terms of lower emitting and non-emitting resources. So low emitting is gas, and that is there isn't a resource type in the current RFP that doesn't meet that long-term incentive compensation goal.
And that's been since March of this year has been amended?
I don't know when this year, but it's for 24 going forward. Yeah.
Okay, so if for instance I was getting my information from the April 23, 2024 annual meeting of shareholders, you've heard something since then that would indicate that you don't believe that that is now being chosen for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Gish, any redirect?
Yeah. One real quick clarification question. The chairman asked about the power coordination agreement, and there was reference to the bridge power coordination agreement. The bridge power coordination agreement was something that was proposed that would be implemented in the event that the sale with Liberty was consumed, correct?
That's
Consummated, not consumed.
Consummated, yes. Yeah. That's correct, right? I was referring, when I said bridge, I was referring to the short-term market purchase of capacity being a bridge or some transition to a longer-term asset,
And-
not the bridge power coordination agreement, which does not exist. The currently FERC-approved power coordination agreement still exists, yes.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else, Mr. Bond? Thank you, Mr. Bond.
Thank you.
All right. So we will need to set a post-hearing procedural schedule. We will have a number of post-hearing data requests. I know Ms. Leggy has a couple. Mr. Kurtz, Mr. West, I don't remember if you all had any. All right. Today is June the 12th. Can you all have your data requests out by Friday?
We can make that work. Yeah.
Okay.
We need to.
Okay. All right. We'll enter a post-hearing procedural schedule that sets the date for data requests to be issued by June 14th. The exception of Juneteenth next Wednesday. No holidays between that. Would 14 days be sufficient for those responses?
I believe so, yes.
Yes. Okay. Insofar as you have individual data requests that you would like to ask for more time, I'd ask two things: that you answer all of the other data requests, and that you, as early as possible, seek an enlargement of time for those specific requests.
Understood.
And the fun part about IRPs is that's the only thing that we actually have to agree on tonight, because we will be setting the rest of the procedural schedule in accordance with, we don't have dates for comments, reply comments, post-hearing already set, right?
Don't have those set.
So it'll be a surprise to everybody. So we will set in accordance with the IRP process that we've had in other cases, we'll have a post-hearing procedural schedule following discovery where provides comments, final comments, staff, that whole thing. But we'll make sure there's plenty of time involved in those. And hopefully be able to issue a final report in time for Mr. West and the folks at Kentucky Power to get started on their next integrated resource plan. Because when one's done, the next one starts. We have two outstanding, I believe, petitions for confidentiality. Or anything else that we need to take up? I think we have all the Pro Hoc Vices for the joint interveners.
Yes.
I think. All right. Thank you all very much. This hearing is adjourned.